Kareem, you had a question?
Sure. Sorry, I also had a comment and a question. On this motivation story, actually, it's fairly important that we get it clear. Certainly, the open source analysis shows that both extrinsic and intrinsic motivations are at play. Some people are in it for, so when we talk about extrinsic motivations, we were thinking about the output, like what comes at the end of the process. And
Extrinsics.
Extrinsic.
Carrots and sticks.
Not just carrot and sticks, but from a process point of view, you either enjoy the process and you're doing it for the process, or you're doing it for the outcome. Outcomes can be different types of carrots and sticks. Can be monetary, it could be reputation, could be ego, the whole range of things like that. And for intrinsic, it is like I enjoy the problem-solving process, the dopamine release point. And what we observe from sort of survey-based research is that indeed, in open source itself, that both extrinsic and intrinsic are at play, that they matter a lot. And certainly in the prize systems, we can't discount extrinsic motivations. I think the framework you want to take is we have a clear sense that different people are motivated by different things. And there's a big self-selection effect going on. In many of these settings, right, people voluntarily join the process, right?
Did you say survey research?
Yes.
We can talk this offline, but therein lies the problem. My assumption is that for the most part, despite the fact that we can seemingly accurately reflect on why we did what we did, that in reality, we're designed not to know why we did what we did, because while we're busy thinking about it, we're eaten by something else.
Maybe. So, I mean, we can have a big discussion about then the whole field of psychology and survey methodology is up in the question. I think the point I want to make, though, is that we want to acknowledge the fact that there are heterogeneous motivations. People are driven by different things. We know that ourselves, right? Amongst ourselves, amongst our friends, different drivers. And what makes these systems attractive is that the systems do not typically have to emphasize one driver versus the other. People join for their own particular reasons, and the self-selection helps us find the right folks. So in an experiment that I've run on the Topcoder platform, we actually find that the extrinsic motivations, the incentives, count as much as the intrinsic motivation.
In the short term, but of course the problem with extrinsics, and I think NASA certainly knows this better than most, is availability of money. And extrinsics include the boss that always gave you a pat on the back. Of course, the problem is, what happens when the boss goes away or the budgets dry up? So does the innovation. So the only durable, and you're from Harvard, right? Okay, so the stuff I'm talking about is from Teresa Mobley,
one of
your colleagues. And Teresa and I did a lot of work together back in the mid-90s on this subject. But I think I'm reporting accurately on her data that says, over the long haul, the extrinsics are most effective as the icing, not the cake.
Maybe, but I think that we have to account for self-selection. So many of the studies done in psychology have been put people in a randomized setting where they didn't have a choice to work on the activity. And when we give people choice, right, and we have the boost of the extrinsic versus intrinsic counts as much as intrinsic. Anyway, we can talk offline about that because that's sort of the newly formed emerging side. The question I want to ask you all is, when should we not do open innovation? When should we not go outside?
You know, that was a part of our thought process in terms of evaluating the material that was going forward. You know, could we understand at our like novice level of working in open innovation, maybe what wouldn't have worked well or wasn't appropriate. So we have some pretty clear dividing lines with export control, what we, you know, material that we cannot by law take out, right? And we also know material that it's hard to believe, and we could be wrong at this point, that anyone on the outside could really help us solve the problem. You know, these are so specific to space flight. You know, maybe with the emergence of commercial space flight and more people building rockets and flying people, there's going to be a different knowledge base that we could tap into. But we have a pretty concentrated source, and Kareem actually gave us a great presentation. I think had a slide up there today about the concentrated versus distributed. And we have some areas where we have a high level of assurance that we're really in that area. But we do have a small amount of doubt, and it says, could we take the chance with some of these areas that we were so sure were ours and put them out there and see what we got, you know, just as part of this experiment. And we haven't really done an analysis to go back to all the challenges we ran to go and say, well, originally, what did we think of this, and what do we think of it now? Which would be an interesting part of evaluating where we've gotten to. How right or wrong were we with what we thought was really something we had to internalize? We did think, however, we could use the information that we got back to help us understand that, oh, this is something we really do have to internalize. That the world at large is not interested in this, or it's not commercializable. You know, this is something we're going to go work as a problem, and maybe we could spin off something. You know, because that was actually an interesting approach that Steve alluded to, was using the challenge platforms to essentially advertise a capability that you use or have developed a certain capability to do X, but you're unaware of all the various ways it could be applied. So you put the challenge out there that says, I have this capability, this is what I do with it, could you think of another way to use it? And it was kind of like, could you think of a different way to get men to want to shave because you have a certain type of razor you're trying to sell? And it's not so much about us selling it, but giving it back to the community that says, here's some essentially intellectual property we could license out if someone could think of a really interesting way to apply it and make it a commercial entity. But yeah, we really struggle with some of that, what proprietary we have to do versus what could the world at large contribute to it.
We're going to take one more question back here, and then I encourage you
a little bit again to that question. I almost think that, again, not
Quickly,
to get stuck
Eugene.
on terminology, but I think it's almost the wrong question, because I think the open innovation is actually the tool to answer that question. Because from our experience with the commercial companies, and I think it should be translated into the agencies and the government labs, is to do this searching, to do the scouting, to do whatever process we have between those service providers in the room and maybe some others, is to decide if the solution could be found out there, or you really need to spend time internally to resolve it. The only answer to that question is a process of going through the open innovation process. So I kind of turn it a little bit on your head, but again, we can discuss what each word means, and I know people have different.
And I want to encourage people to talk over lunch, and I know there's a lot of other questions, but I'm going to take one more question, and then we'll break for lunch, and you can network during lunch. Yeah.
Yes, my question's for Lisa. Lisa, you said that a good challenge has to be very specifically written. So how do you write a good challenge that's specific enough and yet open enough so that you can encourage unique answers?
It's to me. Okay. So, so there's an example is one of the challenges I have out on our website is for a natural blue color. And so if you can put specific, if you can bring it out of the sort of the realm of the immediate expertise and talk about, it has to be a compound that absorbs in this spectrum of light, and there are very specific criteria that the inventor or the submitter can compare their criteria to. It has to be a compound that retains its molecular structure after being heated to 200 degrees for 20 minutes or something. So you take it out of, you don't say you have to be able to cook it in a sauce. You say, here's the temperature, it needs to survive for this amount of time. Because often when we start with our food challenges, it's like, I want a, something that I can put in this mix and it can survive baking. But you have to abstract that up to sort of the general scientific principles, and then you have to put those specific criteria in there that so people can easily judge whether they have something that can meet the challenge.
10 seconds on this analogy again. Let me end with this. So here's one of the greatest creative briefs I ever wrote, or you would call it a challenge. Artificial Christmas tree is to real Christmas tree as X is to the candle. Create X. Specific enough, got a general idea, and yet broad enough and encouraging enough to dig in and say, for the first time 5 or 10 years ago, sales of artificial trees were bigger than real trees. That was like the holy grail. Why would we ever do that? It encourages people to say, what generically is going on here? How could this have happened? And one answer is fakes became real.
Please join me in thanking the panel.
I have just one quick again comment. Sorry, and to steal a little bit of time. One thing that already been mentioned is that the process is not static. You need to triangulate, as Greg said, at every point. So in our 4 to 6 month duration of the project, is that we very often rewrite the statement based on the feedback that we get from the client and based on the feedback we get from the potential solution providers. And very often we even start with several different definitions of the same problem. One is very broad, and one is very, very narrow, specifically technical. And we never had one person responding to both of those because they're so differently that they're addressing different types of potential solution providers.
Rewriting the statement, there are a lot of questions about that. So let's end for lunch, and you can ask him that and many others. Thank you. Oops. Last word from Jeff.
Sorry, don't leave just yet. A couple of housekeeping things, but before we do that, I'd like to get Kareem and Paul to come back up from yesterday. And I think what I'll do is I'll just ask each of you to come by and in the spirit of non-monetary awards, but hopefully ones that are of value, we have montages for you from the Spaceflight Center. And we'd like to give those to all of our speakers and panelists in recognition and thanks for everything they did for us yesterday with our internal workshop and today. And we have one for Jeff this afternoon, but he has to speak first before he can get his montage. So if you just come by and let's recognize everybody. Kareem Lakhani. I don't have enough hands. And Paul Carlisle. And Pascal, we had you next as you were a speaker. Thank you very much. And Robin Sturm. Bev Godwin. Thanks so much. Eugene Buff. Thanks, Eugene. Thanks. Steve Domek. Thanks. Jen Fogarty. You're a panelist. It's in lieu of pay. Craig Wynette. And Lisa Pinnell. Thanks very much. I want to just thank all the speakers and panelists. This was great. I was talking to somebody at the break, and we probably could have done this for 2 days, but you never know how long to schedule these things. So this is our first outing, and I would certainly like your feedback today because we want to make this of ongoing, continuous value to you and not cut off the dialogue. So in the spirit of that, a couple of housekeeping things. One is I'd like to give you time at lunch to find each other. So I'm proposing we slide the afternoon to half an hour to the right. We'll just slip the agenda down a half an hour. I know some of you may need to leave later in the afternoon, but that'll give you about an hour and 15 minutes for lunch to break off. And I know there are conversations that people want to have. I would also just remind you that Jeff Hamawi and Lisa are talking this afternoon again on other models I think you'll be interested in, so please come back at 1:30 so we can start that. The breakout sessions this afternoon, for those, how many of you can stay, I hope. We'd really like you to match up at tables. There was so much energy around projects and challenges that if the themes don't necessarily work for you out there, we can open up more Project 101 or Challenge 101 questions so you can recombine with the folks you heard speak today and then perhaps get into more specifics. So what we've done to try to help us gauge that is on your way out, there are 3 stacks of breakout sessions that you have in your packet. If you just make a little mark next to the ones you're interested in, it'll give us sort of a volume idea of how to completely structure. I'm sorry. Oh yes, I'm sorry. Just mark 1. Don't mark 3 of interest. Just mark the 1 of highest interest. So we get an idea of what the volume would be, and we'll rearrange those. If you could do that before you go to lunch, that'll help us reset the afternoon. Then we'll have a list of the planned breakout sessions for you at the same table where you picked up your packets, so you can see where those tables are going to be. And we'll make, again, adjustments based on your feedback. You have the list in your packet, again, if you'd look through that also. So we'll slide a half an hour to the right, so if you could be back at 1:30, and I would ask you to keep thinking about who you want to talk to, what tables would be of the most interest, and keep those questions coming. Thank you very much.